Welcome, everyone, to the Master Coaches Wednesday Weekly Buzz. I'm Bob Bertucci. Joined by fellow Master Coaches, Kathy George, Bill Walton, and we hope Nick Haley. Our topic for today is our annual NCAA Women's Division I mid-season poll review. This is where we get into the nitty-gritty of polls, RPIs, and other ways the NCAA should, could, and will pick and seed their 64-team championship tournament. We have two expert guests joining us today, for the discussion. We have Lee Feinswog. Lee is the editor of Volleyball magazine, and he produces one of the polls that we'll be discussing today. And Kevin Pauga, Kevin, I'm sorry, I don't think I pronounced that right.
KP.
KP is easier, that's for sure. He's the Associate Athletic Director at Michigan State and the founder of KPI Sports. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks, Bob.
Bob,
Kevin,
how do you pronounce your name correctly?
It's Pauga. You got plenty close enough, but to Kathy's point, we can just go with KP and
KP is easier for sure.
It's just like I prefer to go with just Lee. And you were wrong on the intro that you don't have two experts. You have one, and then you have somebody else who does a poll. So
okay,
his is legit.
I would argue that Lee's the expert. So we'll each just defer to the other.
There you go.
Well, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go to Bill and ask him to get this whole show on the road and jump into this nitty gritty, all right, with some questions for Kevin, because I know we have a hard stop, Kevin, for you on the show. So we're going to get started with you and work with you in the beginning. Lee, just jump in there anytime you have a question. I'm sure you will. As I told the audience in our little last week's presentation that you're always entertaining and you'll keep us on our toes, I'm sure.
Hey, KP.
Bill.
Last time we talked, I was in Houston. Now I'm in Grand Rapids. I'm across the street from Kathy as I speak. So I'm going to ask you to kind of give us a little foundation. For those of us who are kind of index rating people, geeks, so to speak, there's RPI, there's KPI, there's Massey, there's Pablo, all of those kind of index teams and rank them 1 through 360, whatever number of teams there are. So, and the NCAA historically has used RPI as their primary tool for kind of picking teams into the tournament after automatic qualifiers. So for those people here who just hear these initials, can you just give us a quick understanding of what KPI is and how it might differentiate from RPI?
Yeah, so Bill, there's essentially two different types of metrics, and you've got your results-based metrics that are intended to be how good is your resume, and then you've got more your predictive-based metrics that are more how good is your team. And there's always going to be significant overlap between those two buckets, but when there's a difference between the two teams, oftentimes you're dealing with some good teams that have lost a lot of close matches or competed against a different type of schedule. The RPI is rooted in win percentage, so there's an assumption that teams with good win-loss records are your best teams, which isn't always the case depending on the schedule. Within KPI, what it essentially is trying to do is it more difficult for me to go 15-3 against my schedule, or for Kathy to go 17-1 against her schedule, as an example. And so we're adjusting based on the difficulty in terms of those qualities. We're also going on a game-by-game basis, a match-by-match basis in the case of volleyball, in terms of, hey, what are the quality of these 18 results right now, 20, whatever, however many matches a team's played, from best win all the way to worst loss, so that it digs a little bit deeper rather than just getting one number. It kind of shows your work along the way.
All right, so now KPI is used for men's basketball, yes or no?
Yeah, KPI is one of the 6 metrics that has been part of the men's basketball team sheets now for 5 years.
So is KPI now part of the NCAA committee's metrics for volleyball?
Yeah, so within Division I, within several sports, it's been added to the toolbox that's available for the committee to consider. It's in different stages for different sports for clarity, but the volleyball committee does have it in their toolbox. Other sports, other divisions. So in the case of Division II volleyball, for instance, there's still some processes, but Bill, I'll tell you this, that regardless of your favorite metric, and you mentioned Pablo and you mentioned Massey and some others that might be a little bit more predictive in nature. Part of the what I would term success that we've seen in D1 men's basketball over the last few years is that there's been a couple metrics that measure different things and has allowed committee members to identify and minimize the impact of potential outliers, as well as be able to focus in on where those differences are between teams. So we've started to see some pretty remarkable consistency year over year in terms of qualifying criteria, which hopefully is helping to alleviate some of the controversy, because I'm sure you can all appreciate, rarely is there a coach that says, you know what, the committee took care of us too much this year. More times than not, it's hey, we're seated too low, or we should have been in, we're out. Rarely is it the opposite.
So for a quick advertisement for anybody, Pablo is a predictive.
Mm-hmm.
Massey's a predictive.
Yeah.
I'm a Massey fan, not because I necessarily like it better, but Massey is free for those that want to use a free predictive tool, and Pablo's behind a paywall. So you can read about how they all work for free, but you can't use them all in certain cases unless you are out in front of the paywall. But I think Kathy's got a bird to pick with KP. So Kathy, get on.
I don't know.
One?
Yeah, right. I mean, you've never had a one for me, right? So, no, but as you're talking about like the strength of schedule, and I know you put that in there, and you also have the if you played at home or away. That's right, correct?
Yep. Yep.
And I look at some of the changes, because we were comparing some of these polls on the last call that we had, and just looking at, for instance, Minnesota, who do have votes in the coaches poll, and they're 38 in the RPI and 57 in yours. I know they played a pretty brutal schedule, like a tough schedule early. What do you think? And what do you think goes into that ranking?
Yeah, so they're sitting at 8-8 with a number 4 strength of schedule, and it's actually illustrating the exact point that you're making. That if they're a little bit higher in a predictive metric, as an example, it's likely because they might be a better team than their win-loss record reflects at the moment. You've probably watched a little bit more Minnesota than I have, but given that relative performance win-loss wise against that schedule, that's kind of where the difference comes in. Here's the great thing is that as you all know, schedules are not created in a linear environment, which means that you may have a schedule that's front-loaded, back-loaded, center-loaded in different parts. So right or wrong, what we should see is gaps in metrics that are pretty significant, whether it's with Minnesota or somebody else. We should see that gap close as the season progresses. Now, whether that's that they lean further to where they are in KPI, further to where they are in another metric, that's yet to be determined based on kind of how the back half of their season goes.
So in other words, like as you do go through this and you get towards the tournament, you feel like that's going to catch up to each other and see where it all falls through based on wins and losses and
one way or the other. Usually that gap not always. There's several examples where could it be that the gap doesn't close and that there's difference? Yeah, it could be. But that's also why we need to have multiple metrics that are part of the team sheet, because where that gap exists, hey, what is the results based versus the predictive base? Like, let's say that the difference is in there. If you're better, if you have a better resume than team, it typically means that you've won a lot of that you're winning a lot of close matches, that you're really good and you're really good at winning. The other example, I'll kind of put it in NFL terms. Let's say that the Philadelphia Eagles go 12-5 and the Dallas Cowboys go 13-4. but the Eagles' scoring differential over the course of the season is plus 100 and the Cowboys is plus 10. The Cowboys still win the NFC East because they have the better win-loss record. But just based on scoring margin non-adjusted, it would actually tell you that the Eagles are the better team, but the Cowboys have the better record. And that happens sometimes, as you well know. Like that's why we play the matches.
Right. And as you even go through with basketball and that, you look at the scoring differentials, you're looking at the different points, and add a couple other things that kind of play in to make the big picture a little bit more clear, correct?
Yeah. And I would tell you from a scoring margin, from a number of sets in volleyball, there's some slight improvement relative to the overall accuracy. We're not talking about dramatic differences, and some sports have asked that be turned off because they're fearful of running up the score. But in volleyball in particular, it's really difficult to run up the score regardless of who you're playing. And the difference between a point here and a point there, there's a lot of points that are played over the course of a season. And even if you're talking about 4, 5, 6% of those points are played when you might not have your first team on the court, that's not really affecting your metrics, whether it's predictive, results-based, whatever it is, in any sort of meaningful way.
Okay. Well, absolutely. And Mick, thanks for joining us. I see you here. So I know you were, you had some, I mean, we talk about this and plan, before we get to this meeting, and everybody has their different kind of things that they're looking at. So I know Mick has some things for you here as well.
Well, I just have a question as if I'm a coach and I'm in the season. And if the committee is relying on your ranking system here, is there anything I can do other than win to help my situation?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because part of the challenges or benefits, depending on your perspective with the RPI, is that there have been some systematic ways where you can game the RPI. Essentially what you're looking for is you're looking to play teams that have artificially inflated win-loss records that outpace the quality of their teams. And beating those teams, the team that is 26-3 in the 29th ranked conference, for instance, that's a team that has, in all likelihood, either an artificially inflated win-loss record or a undetermined quality based on the number of games that they played against certain categories of teams. The focus here with a results-based metric shifts away from playing teams with good win-loss records to playing good teams. So you're properly rewarding teams based on the quality of the opponent, based on instead of the win-loss record. That's a long way of saying that it should be beneficial in general from an accuracy standpoint to better quantify who you're playing in terms of quality. So it's more difficult to game. That's frustrating for coaches. I don't want to oversimplify and say just win, but because it also matters who you win against. And so for coaches out there, as we kind of evolve into a more data-driven process and data-driven world, I would encourage coaches that whatever you think that you need scheduling-wise, schedule one more quality team, et cetera, and give yourself that extra opportunity. And then you have to be good enough to compete against an NCAA tournament type schedule. So gaming the system is kind of going by the wayside, and I think that's good.
So I'm in the season though, and I'm locked in on my schedule. Mm-hmm. If I can't do anything about it, then I have to hope my conference is going to help me out with the quality teams I'm playing.
Yeah, no, Mick, it's a really good point, because that's where you're not necessarily rewarded just based on your strength of schedule. Strength of schedule is an explanation more than it's a metric. It's more defining the why behind some data points. So let's say that you even had good intentions about your schedule, and for whatever reason it just didn't play out because a couple teams got hurt, something happened, whatever it is. The example that I had given earlier, that hey, was it more difficult for me to go 17-1 or Kathy to go 15-3? By the time we hit the end of the season, let's say that your schedule's not as strong as somebody else's. Well, maybe for you, it might be that that a 25-3 record against your weaker schedule is the difficulty equivalent of me going 21-7 against my stronger schedule. That's what we're able to measure and to be able to essentially offset the differences in the schedules in a way. You still need to have something to hang your hat on in order to get into that conversation. But if I play, let's say, 6 top 25 teams and you go and you play 2 top 25 teams, we're offsetting that difference. That essentially me going 3-3 in my 6 is somewhat equivalent to you going 1-1 in your 2.
So most of the people here are familiar with the Big Ten. You had some discussion about Minnesota.
Yep.
They can be ranked as far down as 57th or as high as 38th using the RPI, the KPI, or the FIG stats in those 3 categories. We also have Ohio State that's as high as 52 and as low as 94. And I virtually feel like they've taken themselves out of getting into the tournament by some decisions they've made of scheduling too tough. Now, everybody says, no, they're going to benefit from playing in the Big Ten. But if you look at the Big Ten right now, they have a chance of only getting 4 teams in the tournament if we use your stats. They have two on the bubble. Indiana and Minnesota are the 2 on the bubble. Ohio State's not even close. You have to be under 50 to even be considered for the tournament unless you win the conference. So they're in the middle of their season right now. They got a half season left. Are they out of it, or what can they do?
So I won't say that they're out of it. There's still several weeks to go, but in both cases they've got some winning that they need to certainly achieve here. Your point is valid relative to strength of schedule. Like I tell coaches all the time that what you're trying to do is you're trying to simultaneously maximize your non-conference win percentage and your non-conference strength of schedule. So you're trying to push those boulders in the same direction at a similar pace. And so it does you no good. Let's say that you play the number 1 strength of schedule and you go 3-8 against it. That's not doing you a whole lot of good. So if you're 11-0 in against a really weak non-conference strength of schedule, it either means that you're really, really good or that you underscheduled. If you're 2-9, it either means that you're not really good or that you overscheduled. And that's sometimes a decision that you need to understand locally, because you are trying to thread that needle, and both those numbers, non-conference strength of schedule, however you want to grade it out, and non-conference win percentage are really important. So in both cases, they both might be good enough to compete with NCAA tournament level teams. But at the end of the day too, like the matches have to count. The winning and losing has to count. That Cowboys-Eagles example that I gave with the NFC East, like that has to matter in terms of winning, because if we're essentially trying to play against a computer simulation, the way that you game a computer simulation is, hey, we just got to get close. Whether we win or lose doesn't matter. We just got to be as close as we can with as good of teams as possible, and we'll get our predictive metrics up. That's why there's greater correlation between the results-based metrics and NCAA tournament selection. You're building a resume to get in. You're building standings to get in, which for the overall health of the sport is probably better. So long story short, in both cases, they both might be NCAA tournament quality teams, but at some point you have to win enough to get there.
So you're saying
so Kevin, I have a question. It's along the same lines. If I'm talking to other conference coaches about scheduling, how should I schedule to have a chance to create the most positive KPI I can?
Yeah.
I mean, in simple English.
Yeah, I'll
you explain it in detail.
I'll drastically oversimplify it here.
Okay.
Let's say that you've got 12 non-conference games. I'd probably try and schedule 6 games that I have a 90% plus degree of confidence that I'm going to win those. So that gets me 6-0. And then I'd probably look to approximately 6 other matches that, hey, it's a group of NCAA tournament quality teams, top 100 teams, like some good teams, with the goal being that I go at least 500 in those. with that mindset, if I win the 6 I'm supposed to, if I split the more difficult matches, I'm 9-3 going into conference. Probably have 1 or 2 wins against NCAA tournament quality teams, and depending the level of conference that I'm going into. Now, if I go 9-9, 10-10, 11-9, depending on number of matches, all those different things, and the level of conference, I should feel pretty good. That's probably more in your couple conferences at the top as to how you're trying to schedule it. So that's kind of the half and half approach. There's obviously more nuance to it, Bob, but that would be kind of my general philosophy if I thought that I had an NCAA tournament quality team.
Well, that helps me understand it a little bit better, actually. How about, many of the Division I conferences right now are planning to add a conference tournament. Yeah. Similar to what's been happening with men's basketball. Mm-hmm. What effects does this have on your RPI or KPI?
The overall impact metric-wise is relatively minimal. Think of it this way: that let's say you're a 4 seed in a conference tournament, depending on format, and you play 2 matches in a conference tournament out of 30 some matches. Regular season would count about 95% of your data points, and the conference tournament it's about 3% per match. So between 3 and 6% if you're playing 1 or 2 conference tournament games. So we're not talking about a drastic impact. And if the bracket holds relative to seed line, you're not moving a whole lot. If you're the 3 seed, let's say, and you beat 6 and you lose to 2, you're going 1-1 with expected outcomes. You might move 1 or 2 spots in either direction. So I would encourage coaches, if you're making decisions relative to conference tournaments at the conference level, metrics probably shouldn't be your focal point, because the way that you're having drastic impacts there, sure, if the 6 seed goes and beats 3 and 2 and gets 2 wins of that quality, that could move you a little bit, but that's probably moving you maybe 6 or 8 spots. So the idea that anybody's going to move from 50 to 30 or from 20 to 35 as a result of a conference tournament, those results are going to be incredibly rare.
KP,
Okay, so there's nothing really.
Bob, let me just interrupt, because
Sure.
It's in the same line with an exact example. Minnesota is around 51 right now, RPI, I think.
Yep.
And there's a guy that does a prediction on where their RPI is going to finish based on what they've done so far, and he plays it out, and he has a predictive RPI, and he predicts that they're going to finish up 51. They're 56 now. He predicts they're going to finish up 51, and that they're going to be 15-13.
Yeah.
But if they were in a conference tournament and they were to do just what you just talked about, beat the 3 seed and the 2 seed and make it to the semifinals, that could move them up enough to get an at-large with a conference tournament with a 15-13 record with 2 wins over the 2 of the top 4 teams in the conference. In
your scenario, Bill, yes, you are right. That is the extreme result scenario where it works to the benefit. The counter there would be that that in many instances you're playing 1 or 2 fewer conference matches, or you're pulling something off just in terms of the real estate of the calendar. Doesn't mean that in Minnesota's case it would be that level of competition. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. But your example is the exact extreme result that occurs. That would be helpful. The number of times that happens in at-large leagues over the course of a season, it tends to happen about once or twice. We see it very rarely, even in basketball, men's and women's basketball, where we're getting that level of extreme results. So can it happen? Certainly. Is Minnesota maybe good enough to be a team that does that? Yeah, you're right, Bill. They just may be. But the frequency in which that happens, we looked at it across multiple sports. It's maybe like I said, a handful of times a year max. And to think that in a if the Big Ten were to have a tournament, to think that happens maybe once every 6 or 7 years, that in terms of the data that we've looked at, is kind of the frequency in which that example happens.
Since I have internet,
Kevin,
again, chime in.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
just
Lee.
happy to be back. Well, what you're an isolated example there, Bill. If it's a one and done league with a one bid, it doesn't make any difference about the upsets because you're playing teams that aren't good enough to improve your RPI anyway. You're talking about teams that are down in the 170s or the 250s, and so that's a moot point until the Big Four next year if they decide to add conference tournaments and they matter, so somebody can play themselves in. But
Lee, the reason I gave that example is the Big Ten, the SEC, the ACC, and I forget the Big 12. The Big 12 are all planning conference tournaments next year.
Well, but they're the only leagues that matter in all of this because
that was my question.
Big Four, everybody else is a one and done.
Yeah,
and
it wasn't a one and done example. This was can they improve my KPI?
Yeah, so it gives a March Madness element to it that some team can get hot and run through and create an extra spot for their league, But I think it's much less likely to happen in volleyball than it does in other sports, especially basketball.
So we're talking about team scheduling, but what if conferences decided to schedule differently? What if conferences, they say you have a 12-team conference, and the top 6 teams schedule each other twice, and they schedule the bottom 6 once, and vice versa with the bottom 6. Does that significantly help their KPI?
It doesn't. That would actually be too extreme of a level to go by. What I would tell you is that you're trying to maximize like versus like competition. So you don't want, in your 12-team example, you don't want that such a clear delineation between 6 and 7, where 6 is all of a sudden getting the top 5, while 7's getting the bottom 5 as their 2 plays. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to maximize like versus like collectively across the overall membership, while also incorporating in some travel swings that we're going to need to incorporate based on the spread out geography of several of these conferences, rivalries, et cetera. So there is a mathematical formula that we use for several conferences as we're helping create conference schedules in order to do exactly that. Wisconsin and Nebraska in the Big Ten are going to play twice this year. If it was just simply hey, we're going to rotate opponents, yada, 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 they might be playing once just because it was their turn to play once. So overall, you're trying to kind of thread the needle between the geography and the competitive balance, while also maintaining some level of integrity as well in terms of the conference standings.
Kevin, I want to thank you. I know you're on a hard stop here, and we really appreciate you coming in and going over all the intricacies of what goes into KPI and some of the other polls that are out there. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Sounds good. Great talking to you all. Appreciate you having me.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
Take care.
Thank you.
I also have to go. I'm sorry, I have a meeting, but Lee, I would have loved to, but I'll hear about you later. So, so much. Good to see you.
My heart is broken.
I know. I feel so bad leaving you like that, but I mean, you have to go with these 3 guys now. So I don't know.
If I were by you, Kathy, I'd be leaving and going to Founders Brewery and just hanging out the rest of the day.
Well, you're going to have to come visit us, Lee.
You got it.
Okay. We'll see y'all later. Bye-bye.
All right, Kath.
Bye, Kathy.
All right, Lee, you're up. We can't wait to hear what you have to say about your poll. And
forget my poll, Bob. For what he was saying, it's really relatively simple. Schedule fairly well and win more matches than you lose, and win important matches. I mean, last year Auburn went 14-0 with like a horribly pitiful preseason pre-conference schedule, and went a couple of rounds in the NCAA tournament. Just win. Al Davis, just win, baby.
Well,
you can outthink the room on it. Sure, you can split hairs, but and I've always been this big. Yeah, sorry, Mick. Sorry, Bill. I've always thought that the pre-conference schedule should be weighted 0.7. Okay, it shouldn't count as much. Like Texas going to Long Beach State the first weekend and playing without Asia O'Neal, that loss might cost them a top 4 seed. Seriously, Stanford playing without Katie Baird, losing 2 matches, early might cost them a top 4 seed. You know, I also think that the NCAA has simply got to let volleyball start practice earlier, just like it does for football. It's just absurd and obscene that they allow them only 2 weeks and then play. But I would have the conference season begins where you play everybody, and then you'd go to and I'm talking about the Power Four here. Then you'd go to your non-conference season. Then you wouldn't play everybody early. You'd play them in like around 40% of the schedule in. Then you'd restructure like some conferences have done for RPI ratings, where only the top half plays the top half and the bottom half plays the bottom half. Tough luck. It's like relegation in the Premier League. But you lower teams are killing us when it comes to going to the NCAA tournament. Then the issue also becomes with the Power Four. You're going to get 12 teams in per league. You know, it used to be, you got 5. It's like, wow. I mean, next year without the Pac-2, what are you going to do? You know,
Pac-2.
Yeah.
Well, hey, but I can take issue with about 3 of those because according to KP, if you schedule the top 6 against themselves and only one time against the bottom 6, he says that doesn't work to your advantage. That in fact hurts your conference and hurts you. And then secondly, for you to play part of your conference schedule first and then play open teams second, that would mean the whole country would have to do that because they would be in their conference season. There wouldn't be anybody to play unless you got everybody to do it that way. So I like the idea, but you have to have full cooperation.
If only we had a czar of volleyball in America who simply said things should be a certain way, but we don't.
So let's talk about this. You decided to do a poll this year. Now we got really 5 polls. We got the AVCA poll, we've got the FIG poll, we've got the KPI, we got the RPI, we've got a couple of people in the NCAA throwing out a poll. So we got about 5 polls. But why did you get into doing polls, and how do you think that can help collegiate volleyball?
Well, all of these things help collegiate volleyball in that, here I go being the Johnny Appleseed of NCAA volleyball and all volleyball. You know, the fastest growing sport in the world right now is boys volleyball. Everything's on an up escalator in our sports. Every single night there's attendance records being set. The TV ratings are unbelievable. The interest from people outside of volleyball is growing, and then more people are just jumping on the bandwagon, and softcore volleyball fans have become hardcore volleyball fans, on and on and on. But there's only 2 polls, Mick. The other ones you're talking about, like the RPI and the KPI, they're computer rankings. They're not polls per se. Ours is just a simple vote. One of the reasons that we started was because of you. You were one of the people and coaches who said to me for years, why don't you have a media poll? Kelly Sheffield from Wisconsin, Jared Elliott from Texas were among the others who were like, you need a media poll. And here's why. Now, it all ties into what I said previously. 5, 6, 7 years ago, I couldn't have put together 12 people in the media who followed volleyball on the grand scale of the whole country like the ones we have now. And now I've got people asking, can they come on? I would imagine next year, instead of having just 12 voters, we'll have 15 or maybe more. And it's a good thing for a number of reasons. Number one is the AVCA poll is so flawed, and it finally catches back up now because there's enough matches being played. But a head coach, Mick, you're a junkie for this, and you're unusual in that probably during your seasons when you were coaching at like Texas and USC, you watched a lot of other volleyball and paid attention to what was happening around the country. Most coaches are right here. All they know about is who we're playing on Wednesday, who we playing on Saturday, what's happening to my team, maybe a little bit about my league. You know, they can't tell you things like when Julia Cardona was the AVCA National Player of the Week this week for Evansville. They didn't know, like I knew, that not only did she have 40 kills in the match that got her all the pub, but she had 27 in the next, because we follow it all. And so a media poll, in specifically the volleyballmag.com Super 16 media poll, please go to volleyballmag.com and click on it. We got people who are following the whole nation and voting. And you don't have to follow the whole nation because you only need to follow 25 teams probably to pick the top 16. But our view of the world is wider than the AVCA's because you got director of ops voting, you got sports information. You know, the coach calls the SID and says, I got to get my ballot in, hurry up and pick a top 25, and that SID doesn't follow. Heck, they don't even, so that's why ours is good. And it's been a long time coming, and it's been cool. It's just kind of fun. It's just a conversation piece. We're not in the equation.
Well, Lee, why did you go with 16 instead of 25, the same as the AVCA poll? Is there a reason for that?
Well, 25 requires more work, Bob, number one. Number two, there are 16 seeds. You get 16 seeds. It's just easier. I mean, we're a small operation, and, be able to pull this together, between Sunday night and Monday morning. We don't have a computer with the system that AVCA does to put theirs together. And so we're able to, 16 is easy. You can tabulate it a lot easier than 25. And our pollsters all give comments. Some of them tell their whole polls, either on the poll itself or on their social media. And they talk about their logic, which you don't get any out of the AVCA. So we're a conversation piece, and we're not, we should be in the equation. The committee should be looking at our poll and what our people say, but that's here nor there. Why did I start it? Because people like Mick Haley busted my chops for years and says, when are you going to have a media poll? So we do. And then I had to make them.
Well, I know exactly what you're talking about. I bust my chops all the time too.
There you go.
Hey,
so who's on the poll, Lee? Who votes? Who are your voters?
Well, I mean, Bill, if you went to volleyballmag.com every day and read it, you would. I've got it right here.
I know who's on your poll.
All right, I'm going to read them all.
Watching.
Emily Eman, the Big Ten Network and ESPN analyst. Ed Strong, who is our super tweeter. Ed Strong is. If you follow us on Twitter on Match Night, I'm telling you, Ed Strong is an encyclopedia. The recall, the notes, the things. You want to follow NCAA volleyball? Just follow that Twitter account. It's unbelievable. I don't get any credit for it except convincing him to do it. The guy's unbelievable. We've got Daniel Gilman, whose claim to fame is doing a weekly video with Mick Haley. But he's also the play-by-play for Cal Poly volleyball and now follows the whole thing. Lincoln Arneal, who covers Nebraska for Huskers Illustrated. Great guy. Sam Gore from ESPN, who just loves our sport. The aforementioned McKaylee. I was telling the story before we got on the air, Mick, about McKaylee and how a kid called you that. We'll bore everybody. Dennis Punzel, who covers Wisconsin for the newspaper there. Fran Flory, the former LSU coach, who won the last AIAW national championship at Texas, coached by one Mick Haley. Anne Marie Anderson, who does ESPN, the Pac-12, Big Ten Network, keeps an eye, follows it all. Shelby Coppage is another kid from Texas. She's doing a real nice job, an ESPN analyst. Oh, and then me. That's on the last one on there. So that's our dirty dozen, if you will. And I was reading the list. You threw me for one there, Bill. But
Lee, do you more than one vote?
No. Only on the All-American teams. I'm the voice of God when it comes to that at the end there. I got it. There's tiebreakers and stuff. Because that's a whole nother story for another day.
So,
and I'm hoping that all of these people who vote here will join us on our All-American poll, our teams, when that comes in December, which would like double the number of voters we have. Then you talk about Bob. That's a hell of a thing. So we have a fourth team. The AVCA makes a mistake of sticking with 3 because they've always done 3. And then they have an honorable mention, and they don't honor enough on the honorable mention. We added a 4th team, and we could add a 5th, a 6th, a 7th. And we wouldn't be doing an injustice to the sport because there are so many good players from top to bottom in the 344 teams that play NCAA Division I volleyball.
Hey, Lee, do you ever look at the Volleyball Magazine poll compared to the AVCA poll? How close?
Oh yeah, I like to see. I felt like when we started and then into the second week, they kind of caught up with us a little bit. We're in disagreement on a few things. Like, for example, we had Arkansas higher. My pollsters this week tied Arkansas for 7th with Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh's 7 in the AVCA. Arkansas is 10, and Kansas getting a lot of love, for example, still from everybody. And I was surprised to see they were 30, in the RPI.
That's right. That's right.
We still had Florida in there. I tied for 15th with Dayton. I had Dayton 13. I had dropped out Arizona State, which actually moved up 2 spots in our poll because I think the loss to Oregon State is just as bad or worse than upsetting Oregon. God, the results last week. I mean, when you had Miami not only win at Georgia Tech, but sweep at Georgia Tech, when you had Arizona State coming off the loss to Oregon State, not only win at Oregon, but sweep at Oregon. I mean, it just went on and on. By the way, last week I saw Louisville and Pittsburgh. And boy, talk about high-level big girl volleyball. Good stuff from both teams.
So talking about polls, and how can the NCAA committee use the polls more effectively to get a fair placement of the teams? And I'm going to suggest that the eyeball test has some validity, because skilled people who have watched the game a long time know some things. Even if they don't know it, they see some things that affect how they rank teams. Not always good, as you can see by the AVCA poll, because they don't put the time into it sometimes, but sometimes really good. And I see, I was just doing this for myself this morning, and I got to feeling like I looked at 5 evaluations, 5 different polls of each team. And I was going through each one, and I was shocked at some things. But first, let's answer the first question. How do you feel about these polls? Are they confusing to the committee, or could they use them more effectively?
Well, to your point, there's just a lot of times where let me circle back to that. Let's go. So there's going to be the last 4 out, the last 4 in. Okay. And none of those 8 teams are going to win the national championship. So if in that last 4 out, that's where we might have a little bit of controversy, or the last 4 in, we might, how did so-and-so make it? And then you look, your next argument with the bracket might be for 3 or 4 teams and the way they're seated. Right. But as a rule, they kind of get the bracket right. Now, do they get it right necessarily for the top 4, the top 6, 7, the order? But the 64 teams that make it, give or take, are pretty close. However, the eyeball test, to your point, is really worth a lot. I mean, sometimes you can just have said, I've watched these 2 teams play, and there's no comparison between State U and this team. And that's kind of infuriating sometimes when you look at it. The committee this year has a chair who is a really great volleyball person, Holly Strauss O'Brien. She played at North Carolina. She coached at UConn, and she really knows volleyball. There's a lot of other people on here who I don't believe were either volleyball players or volleyball coaches. Not that you have to be. I mean, I was never a volleyball player or volleyball coach, luckily for the volleyball world. But, I think I have some good frame of reference here. Your old compatriot from way back, Christine Plonsky at Texas, is on the committee. And, Christine is not a volleyball person per se, but I trust her implicitly for being on the committee and doing the right thing. There's a lot of other people on here I just simply don't know. And but I never doubt their passion and their hard work and their belief that they're going to try to do the right thing. Back to the polls, you can't if you just go chalk on the NCAA RPI, that's a mistake. If you just listen to everything the KP says and say, okay, we're doing it that way, that's a mistake. If the AVCA poll, I don't know, is the AVCA poll considered?
I believe it's one of the things that they can use to make decisions by. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think our top 16 is more valid than their top 16, because we just have people who are taking a look at it better. And, but then from 17 to 25 or 17 all the way to 64, I can't help you. We only got 16. I did like the year when we had the COVID. Not that I liked COVID, but the tournament was only 48 teams, which wasn't terrible. And they seeded 1 through 48 because they were all in the same place and geography didn't matter. I still wish they would seed 1 through 64 and geography be damned, but that's never going to happen. Last year, Purdue was a 1 seed and lost a basketball first round tournament game. We're never going to have a 16 beat a 1. We're never going to have a beat a 2. It's just we're years and years away from that ever happening in our sport.
Okay, so let's take some of your comments here.
Okay,
I have a feeling that the last eight 4 in 4 out make a heck of a difference, and I see sometimes that Power 5 conferences, Power 4 conferences get their teams in the last 4 when there might be 1 or 2 other teams out there that are not seen regularly, that this would make or break the sport at their school. In other words, if they get a chance to get in the tournament. So that's one thing that's interesting. Another thing is that I think schools get reputations and they get in the tournament because of the reputation. Now here are 3 examples. You have Kentucky, who's ranked anywhere from 18th to 37th in these 5 polls. Now think of that. That's quite a swing. But then look at Minnesota. They're ranked anywhere from 38th to 57th. And then Ohio State, and this will be a real interesting one. Ohio State is ranked anywhere from 52nd to 94. 52nd is not even probably a bubble team at this point.
No, but
So,
Mick, listen. Ohio State may not finish over 500 right now.
That's right. They might
and
not.
so they will be eligible anyway.
So kind of a mistake in the way they perceived their team and the way they scheduled for this year. But the polls have a tendency to show you the highs and lows. If you thought Penn State should be 11, there's some people a lot of people that think they should be 17. And so that causes you to go in and investigate a little bit more. Clemson could be on the bubble. Who's talking about Clemson out there? Well, they're 48th in one poll, 54 in another poll, and 60 in another poll. Now, they're one of the teams that could be invited in on a bubble, or Indiana is even more so in that they're 48th. Big Ten could only get 4 teams this year unless somebody just decides to put more in. And that would really challenge the thought that the Big Ten is a big-time volleyball conference. On the other hand, the SEC and the Big 12 have 7 teams in already at this point, unless they go south, with Houston being on the bubble and Mississippi State being on the bubble. Get that? They could both get 8 teams in.
Well,
those are things that I don't know whether they're good or bad for the sport, but I know the committee has to wrestle with these. So why wouldn't you want to look at all these different evaluation methods?
Add to that, Mick, that some people are predicting James Madison to be in the top 16 by the end of the year.
Yeah. Sunbelt team.
And you say they would name James Madison to 5 people on the committee, and they're like, they don't even know what state that's in.
Virginia, and how about? I mean, I voted the Citadel number 1. Are you okay with that?
No,
Just kidding. I'm just kidding. But you know what? If the Citadel runs the table, which they very well could do in the SoCon, and wins their tournament, let's just arbitrarily put them at 34-0, which they could be. I mean, give them a little respect, and don't send them to Nebraska or Wisconsin. Give them a 13 or a 14 seed, because that's eyeball test stuff. You know,
well, if you give them a 13 or 14th seed, though, that gives them a hosting right for the first round.
No, he means 13 or 14, Mick, in the region, not in the
region. In the region, Mick, not 1 through 16.
Well, I'm
overall.
sorry, I couldn't interpret.
Yeah. So, but thanks, Bill. But the point being is that's an eyeball test thing. Yeah. Is the Citadel going to have an RPI worthy of anything? No. But damn, your job is to go out there. I don't care what level you're at. Your job is to go out there and win. And those kids are sucking it up and winning. And they've played some really tough matches, come back and won. And they're fun to watch. I just use them as an isolated example. Those are the things that kind of drive me nuts later. You know, you're splitting hairs with Nebraska, Stanford, Wisconsin, Texas, Louisville. You know, 4 of those 5.
Only that the top 4 of those 6 you just mentioned are going to get a chance to host regionals, and that's really important. So they're in the tournament. We know about the first 4 places. We know the 16 places are important because they host the first round. The other thing that the polls could maybe do and help is the placement of the teams on the bracket. I have felt for a long time that we have not examined where the committee places the teams on the bracket, because analyzing the four separate parts of the bracket are tremendously important and really require a heck of a job by the committee to have a fair and equal tournament going through. And there are sometimes that it's really good, and sometimes that I feel it's lopsided.
Well, like, you know, they love to beat their chest last year. Look at all the women in this regional. Well, I looked at it and said, well, if that was that important to you, why didn't you spread it out so you had a chance to get 4 women into the Final 4?
Yeah,
coaching.
you beat up on yourselves. Sure.
Instead of putting them all together. Too many times, in my opinion, conference teams have to meet each other too early. I know they've got rules and how it all goes. I hate the geography travel thing, and I know that they're restricted to certain things and they have all the guidelines. And back to my original point, I think the committee does the best job that the committee can do under the circumstances and the cards it's dealt. But we wouldn't have conversations like this if we all didn't have things that we thought were important and things that come out of it.
Okay,
Well,
so
ahead.
Lee, are you going to get your poll used as one of the criteria for selection? I mean, you feel like it's a pretty good poll.
They know it's out there, Bob, if they want to look at it and whatever. No, I mean, well, my job is to provide great editorial content for the readers of volleyballmag.com. And we do that day in and day out. We're crushing it. Hey, Mick, you're moving your computer around. Could you move it to the story I wrote about you in the old days on Volleyball
I'm trying. I've got it right there.
No, I did a cover story on Mick. It's on the wall of his office. I was pretty proud when I went to the Palatial Haley Estates. Saw that there.
Oh, my God.
So,
Good thing we have.
We're running out of time. Yeah, it's good. It's good that we're running out of time.
No, but Bob, seriously,
crucify you.
I mean, no, it wasn't the purpose. We didn't start the poll. We did it because we thought everything I do in life is I thought it would be fun, and it is. It has been fun, and it's been really fun for the people involved. I think everybody whose names I mentioned earlier, I think, has taken it to heart. And I think they enjoy it, and it forces you to study it better and to really pay attention. Certainly, there was a ulterior motive in that we would get more people to come on the site and click on more stuff and read it, and they've done that. And so, I know there's been interest there. Nothing we've had has been that outrageous. Like I said, I've disagreed with some of the stuff they've done, and my 16s have never been the 16 that showed up. But I mean, everybody there is really into it. I would hope that the committee would look at it and go, hey, these guys know what they're talking about. This is a good frame of reference, but they won't ever tell us. And they shouldn't. It's fine. I'm okay with that. I do think that people like Mick, who has the experience, the passion, and follows it closely from top to bottom every day, should be on the committee. The committee should not just be people from institutions. There's a place for media people to be on there and to really contribute.
You mean on the NCAA committee?
Absolutely. It doesn't have to be 8. I think, what is it? What do we say? Is it 10 people? And they've got, there's 10. I got the list right here, and there's 10. There could be more, but I can imagine the free for all and how maddening it is in that room anyway. I don't envy any of them, and I applaud them all for doing it. And if any of you are watching, I appreciate it. But I'm the kind of guy who always just loves umpires and referees too, because I think everybody's in it for the right reasons and busting their chops because they really want to, and it matters to us.
Right. And football, Division I football does use people outside of NCAA institutions on their committee.
They do. The college football playoff does, for sure.
Yeah, because they want it to be completely unbiased by conference, all that kind of stuff.
Groundswell for Haley.
Bob, what do you think Lee would do if he got called out on a bad pitch? You think he'd like that umpire?
He would just say, well, that was a pretty good job you did there. I mean, he'll be happy with it.
And he'd probably walk
funny
by,
now
he'd skip back to the dugout, right? He'd skip.
No Dabo Sweeney saying we ought to take on losses, right? Did you see that? Oh, gosh. But this
that's
is
all right.
good,
I'm getting it back now as I go out to referee every once in a while in different places. And
Lee, what time does your poll come out on Mondays? Tell us.
We shoot for 10 a.m. So we're in the ballpark. This week we had a couple people, myself included, a little late getting it in. Stacy, our director of ops, you going to submit? Oh yeah. And I've been scratch papering it, and then I got it in so that finish the tabulation. And so we shoot for 10 o'clock on Monday, which beats the AVCA poll by a couple hours. And after last week, it was hard to pick. What was going on.
Yeah.
You had the top 5. Wisconsin, Nebraska, Stanford, Washington State, and Louisville, and Texas 6. But, like, for example, take Arkansas, which is tied for 7th. If you guys have had them or seen them, I've seen them in person. Yeah, they're little. it's going to catch up to them. You know, they're a round of 16 team. If they got to the round of 8, it would be just fantastic. But God, they play a great brand of volleyball.
Yeah,
And
5'7" and 5'10" outside hitter, and
yeah, legit
barely 6 feet in the middle.
But you know, I watched Louisville this past week, and Charity Looper, who came from UCLA, they list her at 5'9", as if she's 5'8", and she is what a huge X factor and so good for them. God, you can't watch Louisville and not love them. I've watched Washington State a few times. I'm going there in a couple of weeks to see them, and I can't wait to see them in person, because you know, seeing people in person sometimes, you know,
that's the eyeball test.
You get so much more for it. I've seen Stanford twice. I got Wisconsin, Nebraska the day after Thanksgiving in the next to last Big Ten match that'll decide probably the Big Ten title. I've seen Texas. Now I've seen Pittsburgh. I've seen Oregon. I've watched BYU enough on TV. Best kept secret in America, Whitney Bauer, their setter.
Whitney Bowers is awesome. I agree.
Yeah, Penn State I've watched on TV. Very impressive. Tennessee, I'll see here in a couple of weeks. I live in Baton Rouge. They'll come to LSU. I won't see Georgia Tech. I won't see Arizona State. I won't see Dayton. I won't see Florida. Florida and Kentucky don't come to LSU this year. So that schedule that the SEC play in is, kind of crazy. But, you know, and then I'm so intrigued. You want a sleeper team? You want a team that completely screw up the bracket and go to the round of 8 and mess up everything? Florida State. Mark that down, Bill Walton. Florida State there's always one team that messes things up for everybody else, and they're the ones this year.
I think Florida State and Georgia are two teams that can mess with people.
Yeah, you don't
well,
want
right now Georgia's not going to get in.
I know. Earlier they could have.
Florida State's on the bubble here, and just depends on how they do this second half.
Another team you don't want to play, UCF. They just are Arkansas-like in that they just play a wonderful style of volleyball, and they're relentless and better than most people realize. Tough stretch coming up for them. A lot of teams with some tough stretches coming up here as well. They should, you know, make it or break it.
Well, that was addressed, I think, earlier in the show about how some teams are front-loaded or back-loaded in the schedule. So there's still a lot that can happen from this midpoint on to the conference tournaments.
Yeah, TCU is one of those teams. TCU, I love TCU, but these next 4 matches coming up are going to decide so much.
So will they upset the Longhorns tonight?
Probably not.
Okay.
Hey, Lee, should the master coaches have their own poll?
Probably not. You know, you got you know,
call it a hair poll.
Bill, let me say this. You got to go ahead and get people to vote. You need a whole bunch of
just the 4 of us.
And then you got to, oh, absolutely. The 4 of you should, and you should do it over beers, and you should stream it live, you know?
There you go.
Bill wants to have a pole dance. That's what he wants to do. He keeps sending me that all the time. Every time
you don't want to see me, Bob. You don't want to see me on a pole. Trust me.
Now I know the hour's up. It's definitely time to go.
It is. We are just about up. And Lee, we want to really thank you for coming on. It's always enjoyable, and we always have fun when you're on the show.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm glad my internet came back for the half hour I was supposed to be on. I've been in technological hell in my house the last few days, and I have no idea why, from TV sets to computers to internet to cable, everything. So hopefully we're on the good side of it. But great to see you guys. Great to visit. Bill and Bob, I don't get to see you guys in person as much, but I see Mick a lot, and really enjoy it. So thanks for having me.
Keep doing a great job with the magazine.
Keep it up, Lee. You're doing awesome. I love it.
Thanks.
Great stories.
All right, guys, I think we're done for the day. We kind of pretty much used up our hour, so there's not too much time for us to do buzz reaction. But next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about college volleyball, get into the top 4 teams and the seeding for those 4 teams, and how that has impact in selection for hosting regionals. I think that's a story in itself. So I'd like to just thank all our viewers and listeners for being with us for another week.